Hello, everyone. Welcome to 1.5 Degrees, the podcast where together we explore the science, solutions, and stories involved in the fight against climate change. I'm your host, Heidi Pan, speaking with the professionals behind the latest research, policies, culture, and innovations shaping our response to global environmental challenges. For today's episode, we are incredibly fortunate to be joined by Mckenzie Margarethe, who is a marine science communicator with a background in ocean conservation. They were recognized as a climate creator to watch for 2023 for their educational content on social media, which is increasing access to science and empowering their audience to act meaningfully and thoughtfully in climate activism. As a queer person in STEM, they also work to increase minority representation, highlighting and discussing intersectional climate solutions, sustainable fishing, the blue economy, corporate accountability, and more. Mckenzie, it's truly an honor.
Hi, that was such a nice intro. What a nice thing to say about me. Thank you so much.
I mean, it's all you. What the heck?
Oh, no, that was so sweet. That was very well put. I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you for having me as well.
Thank you for being here. Um, okay. Yeah, no, I guess to start, could you tell me, I guess, a little bit more about what it is that you do exactly, and I guess also how you got here and came to be a marine science communicator?
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's what I do now is a bit convoluted. I am a marine science communicator, so I do a lot of educational content, as you talked about, but then I always talk about it as kind of a two-way street where I predominantly explain climate research and marine science to you guys, right? Like I try and break it down for people to be able to access and digest a little bit easier, because I do find that that's probably the biggest barrier that we have to advancing climate research and to advancing climate policy is a lack of accessibility to the people who need it the most, particularly youth. Like the youth are the people that are going to be the most affected by the decisions that we're making at these places, yet we make it so inaccessible for them. So I try to bridge that gap a bit. But where the two-way street comes into play is I also go to conferences and voice for us people, particularly LGBTQ folks, particularly women, in these spaces because they do tend to be overlooked, right? So I try to make sure that you're getting the correct information, but I also try to make sure that the people that are making these decisions are hearing our voices and that the policies that are being made are equitable and just. So that's kind of what I do now. How I got here is a long journey. I grew up in Hawaii, so I grew up with the ocean. I have always loved the water. I did my undergrad in Hawaii and did research in marine science. I started out doing like coral conservation and shoreline restoration sort of stuff in Hawaii, supporting coral reef restoration, and just it was very impactful for me. I think particularly on Oahu, which is where I'm from. Oahu is what we call the main island because that is the place where most people go. It is the most populated, and because of that is also the most environmentally decimated of the islands. Well, besides Kaho'olawe, but that's a whole other story. That's like World War II stuff that happened there. That island no longer really is functional. So we'll beyond that island, Oahu really does have the continual environmental issues because of the amount of people, because of the amount of things that are happening. And when I came into it, we had really just restored this piece of the reef where it had been completely taken over by algae from people dumping like their fish tanks in the ocean, like getting rid of their, pets that they don't want anymore, that becoming an algae bloom. We almost lost a good chunk of our reef. They kind of figured out the answer. And so where I came in was, okay, we have our reef back. How do we make sure that we keep it that way? And so I saw like the impactful efforts that I was doing, the impactful messages that were happening from just the research that I was contributing to. And that really inspired me. So then I continued to kind of do research in that realm. I worked on invertebrates, I worked on urchins, and then I became a naturalist as well. So a naturalist is typically somebody who's very good at species identification and will take people typically on tours. There's many different things a naturalist can do, but I think the most common position that a naturalist has is taking folks on tours, introducing them to different places. So for me, obviously, I'm a marine naturalist. I take people out in the ocean. I explain creatures, what's happening, all of that to people. So I'm quite good at species identification and behavior identification because of that job. And so I was doing both of those, which wasn't sustainable as far as myself. So unfortunately, I did stop with academia for a little bit and continue with being a marine naturalist. And that got me incredible positions. I was a humpback naturalist. I worked on a touring submarine. I had a whole lot of fun. I have loved being a naturalist. I think what really inspired me about that position was getting to see people who didn't grow up with the ocean, who didn't, maybe hadn't even seen the ocean before in their life, hadn't touched the ocean. Particularly on the submarine, it was people who didn't even know how to swim because that wasn't an access that they had. But then you can take them in the submarine and show them the ocean still. Wild, right? And you see how like excited they get and how pumped up they are, and you're like, okay, yes, you now love this place. Here are actions that you can take to protect it. And I realized in that, right? And I realized in that, with seeing all that, the impact that having people love the ocean and showing them like the cool pieces of the ocean has. I think one of the things that we do in conservation is we're constantly like, here's the problem, here's the problem, here's the problem. Like it becomes a little bit doomsday, right? And then you don't want to look at that anymore. Then you're like, okay, I'm so overwhelmed by this, all the negative that you're doing, that I like can't look at it anymore. But if you make it fun, if you show them the cool aspects, show them the parts that you love about it, and then they love it, then they start loving it, and then you're like, okay, also we need to do a lot of work to protect this place. Here are some things that you can do. That has been so much more impactful. So that showed me in person. And then when our favorite time of everyone's life, the pandemic, broke out, I couldn't be a naturalist anymore. Obviously, we couldn't be in person. We actually moved away from Hawaii right before that, and I was planning on being a naturalist in the mainland, and that wasn't a possibility. So I started kind of doing online science communication. I really just started doing it for fun. I was like, we're all sitting in our houses together. Let me teach you. Like, let me tell you about the coral. Let me tell you about the whales, since we're all just bundled up in our homes together. And that just catapulted me into the career that I have now.
Oh my God, that's so awesome. I think like, and also like what you mentioned about the way that we approach, I guess, like addressing so many environmental issues, it really is often so much focus on doomsday. And I mean, it's obviously pretty devastating stuff. So I mean, but like I think it's so smart and so important to I guess make it approachable and accessible to start with. And you do like a really wonderful job with that.
Thank you.
I just it's so important. You've done a lot of work in bringing awareness to ocean conservation. What are some of, I guess, like the most exciting trends, or just trends in general, or developments in marine science that you think people should be paying more attention to in general?
I think we're really at like a pivotal point for marine conservation right now. So if you're paying attention, you're doing a good job. Like there's so much that even is beyond my expertise, right? Like I do have a background in shoreline restoration and sustainable seafood because I grew up with a lot of fishermen, and starting to be a little bit more involved in like blue economy and things along those lines. But there's also a lot beyond that. There's like maritime security and things that we also need to consider that I don't have an expertise in. So if you're paying attention, you're doing a good job. Like we're at such a pivotal point. But I do think there are some really big things that have been happening. Like, one of the bigger things that we had happen this last month was the High Seas Treaty, right? Where that is something that we have been watching over for years at this point. We've been waiting for these deliberations. And it did take locking people in a room and being like, you literally cannot leave until this is done, for it to happen. But it happened. And I think what would be impactful is to know that happened, to like kind of know what it looks like, right? Like what that actually means, what the High Seas Treaty actually, generally means. And then because that, you can see, is this being enacted or not, right? Like I think we hear a lot of empty promises from our lovely elected officials sometimes, right? We get these things like the High Seas Treaty or the Paris Agreement that are like, these
Hmm.
are great goals. Yes, like we need these things. Are you actually doing
Yeah.
them? So I think that is probably something that people might want to start paying attention to is, we as people that are at these conferences, as people that are pushing for these policy changes, are getting the goals across the line. But now we need those goals to be picked up and
Mm.
utilized. And it's going to take public pressure, right? It's going to take people paying attention a bit and being like, okay, how are you doing that then? How is that actually happening? And I think that goes kind of for a lot of things when it comes to climate change as well, right? If we look at the recent IPCC report that came out last week, a couple
Mhm.
days ago at this point,
Yeah, yeah.
they, talked about how we need to limit the warming to 1.5. Like we really need to be making serious measures,
Hmm.
and we need to be doing that by 2030. But so many places have these goals for 2050, and you're like, where's the
That's not
alignment
letting
here?
up.
Yeah, like those, I don't know if you know, but those years actually have 20 years of distance.
Yeah,
As
yeah.
a whole person, that is a whole adult person, that is in the between those times, and we don't have that time, right?
Mm.
Like that's not plausible. So like, it's important for us to know what's happening, but it's also important for us to pay attention to, are there things genuinely being enacted? Are these goals actually being backed by actions? So I think maybe that would be the thing that I would hope people would look into at this time, because we are at that pivotal time. We're getting things across the line, you guys. It's happening. We just now need it to actually happen.
Yeah, yeah, no, we got to get the Michael Scott moment of it's happening.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely. We were all so excited when that High Seas Treaty, like when the ship has reached the shore, right? That just, I think that hit everybody. We were like,
Mhm.
we are finally here, like that we have finally gotten here. And it is a big moment. And I'm so, so incredibly proud of everybody in our community for doing this and for getting it across the line and for the pressure that we put on. I just hope that at this point we also can take those
Actually put
goals
it
and use
forward.
them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, and I guess this also goes back to the role of education in all of this. We need to educate everyone in order to, like ensure that accountability actually happens, and in terms of like actually reaching these goals. But
Mhm.
yeah, no, the High Seas Treaty was really exciting, and I thank you for I guess like sharing what it meant to the community.
Oh
Um,
yeah, absolutely. And I
yeah.
think what I loved about the High Seas Treaty was that it did take long. It was way overdue, right? I think
Mhm.
we were almost a year and a half overdue by that point of like when they said they would definitely have it
Mhm.
out. And then it was a year and a half after that. But I think one of the reasons that that took so long is because they really did put a lot of effort into ensuring
Mhm.
that the things that it said were inclusive and equitable and just. And I think that really does set the benchmark for what we need to be doing in the future, because other policies and other goals do not have the same inclusivity or
Mhm.
equitability behind them,
Mhm.
right? We forget about people all the time in these spaces, and I was incredibly proud of the High Seas Treaty for really being people and the planet, right? We can't have one without the other. And I think that is a very common thing that we forget.
Mhm.
That we're like, we have to save the planet. Yes, of course, but like people are involved in that as well. You can't give up on like a whole group of people to achieve that.
Yeah.
Everybody's in this boat together, and you're rather gonna save the whole boat or you're gonna sink the whole boat. Like there's no in between.
That's such a really great point, and I think yeah, no, that's so important to celebrate because it sets like precedent for like future movements and in terms of like because I think you know um like we need all hands on deck in terms of like actually all hands on deck because everyone has like their unique perspectives and stuff, and we can't all have like just the same people speaking about policies and have that actually be successful.
Yeah.
um yeah. So I mean, you do a lot of work to bring awareness, I guess, to inclusivity in conservation, and also you've brought awareness to the challenges of being like a more minority, or I guess like a woman and queer person in STEM.
Mhm.
How do you think diversity and inclusivity in conservation, marine sciences, or STEM in general can be better supported in the future?
I think my goal and what I've been just putting out there constantly lately is when you go to a panel event, when you go to an event where people are making decisions, where they are talking about an issue, talking about the issues in their community, talking about an issue and how it affects them, and we are making decisions based on what everybody is saying, you should look up at that panel event and you should see yourself. And I don't mean maybe all of yourself, because we're all
Hmm.
incredibly complex people. But for like you said, like when I think about myself and my identity, I am a queer person. That is a big part of who I am. That is a big part of my identity. I come from a coastal community. I grew up in Waikiki, which is right along the coast. I grew up in a place that, if you look at projections, will be underwater by 2050. I am a woman. I am a scientist. So these are big pieces of my identity, right? When I think about myself. And so when I look up at a panel event, I want to see some, like, two or three people that kind of make me, right? Like, I want to look up and maybe there's like a queer person and maybe there's a scientist over here, and those kind of people culminate, and I can feel like my perspective is being seen because there's pieces of me that are up there.
Hmm.
And uh 9 times out of 10 I do not. Right, I look up and it's a lot of men, in blazers, and that's about it, right? And you're just like, okay, well, this is not leading to what should be an equitable decision.
Hmm.
That's the very apparent, right? And particularly in the political climate right now, I think that we should be doing a lot more to be intentionally inclusive of queer folks, because they're being so ostracized and dehumanized by the current political climate, that if we are just leaving them behind or just being very unintentional with our inclusion, it does feel a bit like you're like kind of sweeping it under the rug, right? You're like, oh
Hmm.
yeah, because they say things, right? Like, this space is this is a safe space. We're diverse. Everyone share your pronouns. And you're like, okay.
Hmm.
I would
Go
rather
on.
just, yeah, like I don't even need to share my pronouns if you promise me that you'll actually include queer people.
Mm,
Like, that
mhm,
matters a heck of a lot more to me, for you to actually include queer people than any of that. To say that this is a safe space, cool, great. That doesn't matter unless you're doing something about it, right? So I think there needs to be better intention put into those sorts of things, and that's just kind of what I'm voicing for. I spoke a lot about this at uh, Our Ocean, which was a conference in Panama. It's a pretty large marine conservation conference, and unfortunately, there was very predominantly men on the stage,
mm,
and I talked about it a lot. I talked about it to representatives from the White House. I talked about it from representatives of the Canadian members of Parliament, of Canadian DFO, and I would voice these concerns, amongst other things. Of course, there was other, obviously marine conservation things, and
mm,
and those were big matters as well. But I made sure to continually and very adamantly voice my concern of the lack of diversity in that space, and every single one of them heard me and agreed with me and saw and even came up to me, because I this was the first day of the conference. The second day of the conference came up to me and were like, when you said that, that's all I can see now. Like, every time I go to a panel event, that's what I'm thinking about. And I'm like, good. You should
you
be.
should be, yeah. Oh
um,
my God.
so we still have quite a bit of quite a ways to go. I think people are, the intention, the idea is there. the
Mhm,
the the actions are still a bit slow at the moment, and I think we will get there. I think to have people like myself who are voicing these concerns and who are making people aware of them, so that when they walk into these spaces, they're like, oh, maybe that person had a point, is just really incredibly important. And it's not just me, right? There are so many people out there that are doing this as well. And I think like supporting those people is a big thing. So if you'd like, as I said earlier, thinking about yourself, thinking about your identity, maybe trying to find someone in the like an advocate, person that is going to these places that is voicing for those concerns for you and for your community and your identities, and supporting that person, because you don't have to be constantly doing stuff. You're already a person. You already have a job. You already have so many responsibilities. But if you give that person support, if you give another person that can do these things support, that helps that person get in the room, right? And that now you're being represented. Now you can feel a little bit more rest assured that, okay, my voice will be in this room. I will be heard. So I try and encourage people, that list that we talked, that you in the intro, the 23 climate creators to look at for 2023. There's a list from this year and a list from last year that comes from Peak Action and the Harvard School for Change. That's who created the list. And I think if you look at that list and maybe last year's as well, you can start to find people that that you might see yourself in a bit. And then you can just follow those people and and interact or see what they're doing and see what they're advocating for, and talk and voice your thoughts as well. And just getting that support for those people and getting those people in the room so that they can voice for their communities is so, so big.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, representation is so important.
Yeah.
I guess that's the best way I can, because you just put it so beautifully. I mean, I will say you're definitely, like, from a personal perspective, you are kind of like, I really appreciate the work that you do.
Thank
From
you.
an aspect of, I feel better represented because of you.
Oh, thank you.
And such. Yeah, yeah, no. This is a question I like to ask. If you could turn back time, like, butterfly facts aside, what is some advice that you might give to yourself at that point? Or also, like, what are some resources or advice that you give to someone who's, like, trying to get into this field?
Okay, so two separate answers.
Oh yeah.
First, the advice that I'd give myself if I could go back in time is to ensure that I'm in a safe space. I think
Mm,
we and like a genuine safe space, not just a space that says it's safe, but a genuinely safe space. Those are two
mm,
very different things. Because I have more than once just been so sure that, like, oh, they're scientists, or they're in marine conservation, they're in the ocean sector. These people must be inclusive, and they must care about my community, when really that was not the case. And
mm,
really there wasn't. It was said to be a safe space. It was not a safe space, right? And I think there are ways to kind of navigate that and test that, right? You can talk about like just kind of like small things, right? Like, oh, my partner, and like, and see,
mhm,
navigate the room, see what's happening. Because I've definitely before just kind of assumed
mm,
that I was in a safe space, and I was not. And
mm,
I think that had its effects on me, and still has had its effects on me. Like, there's times that I still do it to this day, right? Because we so often think that people that are in our, in conservation or these sorts of things are on the left side of the spectrum, and
mm,
therefore inclusive of identities and inclusive of all communities. That's not the case. There are so many people within marine conservation and within conservation itself, that are not inclusive, that do not support the queer community, that
mm,
that say pretty awful, vile stuff, to be completely honest. People that have really big names and really big platforms within
mhm,
marine conservation
mhm,
are out there saying pretty bigoted things, right? And so being a bit more aware of that is something that I wish I had done beforehand.
mm,
Because of course, those experiences turned me into the person I am today, so maybe not. But I do think that it would have maybe saved me a little bit of heartbreak to have been more aware
mhm,
of the places that I was in. So I think, don't take safe space as a that is it. Ensure that
mhm.
space is actually
Test
safe.
the waters a little
Yeah,
bit.
test the waters a little bit. I
Mhm,
One of the things that I'm working on for this year is I do want to start getting kind of inclusive pieces for teachers and for people that are in the STEM field, like even just something that's on your desk that's like, I support queers in STEM, or whatever it's going to be, like just something that people know that, like, okay, this person genuinely cares about my community and genuinely is a safe place for me. Because that isn't always clear, right? So I think it's something that I'm working on this year. That's a project that I have ongoing, because I do think that's a really important thing. I think it's an important thing for like younger folks as well. Particularly, as I said, there's really big people that I think a lot of folks look up to, and rightfully so. They have done incredible things within marine conservation, but you look up to them and then you're looking at them for marine conservation, all of a sudden they're coming out of the woodwork with just some awful like anti-LGBT takes, and you're like, oh, wait a second. So I think just being a little bit more aware. But my other to answer the other question about some resources or things that I would give to people that are wanting to get into this space are to look for communities. One of my favorites is Early Careers Ocean Professionals. It's ECOP, so ECOP, and they have regions all over all in different places. There's one in Canada. I'm pretty sure there's one in the US. There's one, kind of all over the place. But they do provide a lot of resources for people that want to get into this space, and not just like job resources, but also like research resources, grants. I think they're one of the better networking pieces for opportunities. But beyond that, just like look for groups, look for people, always be networking. So much of this space is who you know and who can help you out, right? There's so many opportunities that I have gotten simply because somebody said my name, right? Simply because somebody was in the room that knew me. The list, the creators to watch. I had no idea that was happening. I just got an email one day that was like, congratulations, you've been selected. And I was like, oh, and I thought it was a joke at first. I was like, who's punking me? But like, just like that was just somebody that was in the room for that decision making that said my name. Like there's so much value in networking in this space that I highly recommend that. I know it can be very, very, very intimidating. But what I try to remind myself is that people are people. Like they might seem like, oh, this person is so smart and does so much and is so accomplished, and I'm nervous, I don't want to talk to them. Just a person. It's literally just a person. They also have so much crap going on in their life. They also have I can guarantee you that person is going, God, my life is a mess. Like I can almost guarantee it, right? Like, and that has really helped me. I have definitely had a lot of interactions with people whose like research or like initiatives I just find so aspirational and so incredible, or who are like just brilliant, right? Like you're like reading their research and you're like, how does your mind work? You're insane. You're brilliant. I look up to you so much. And I'm like so nervous to be in these spaces with them, because you just kind of put this person in your head, right? Like you build up a person in your head. Oh yeah, in your head you're like, oh God, I could never speak to them. They're so smart. They're gonna think I'm the biggest dummy on the planet. And then you get in a room with them and they're so incredibly chill and they're fine, and they're they just happen to be a really good writer. That's why their paper looks so good. But really they like, you guys are equally intelligent in just different ways, right? Like they might be extremely intelligent within science and stuff, but have no idea how to like walk across the street. Like they're like people are complex, and again I think we build people up in our heads and build like these characters up in our heads that we like make networking seem so scary and so intimidating, when really it's not. Really, most of the time those people also equally want to speak to you. They love their research, for one. They love what they do. Like we don't get paid well. We are here because we love it. Like we're here because this is what we want. Like we're not here for the cash. Like so that person wants to speak to you. That person wants to hear that you read their paper. You read their paper. You made their day. Like they're like, don't feel too intimidated about it. Right? Just do it. And if someone is rude, I have had that experience where somebody is, has a bit of an ego, has been given like a lot of limelight. It's typically a man, that like has, been given a lot of like, they just get that big ego about them. And I have had those interactions where I'm like, God, this person's just a dick. And I think before I used to take it a bit personally, where I would be like, oh, like I'm just not good enough. And then you kind of realize you're like, no, that person's just a dick. Like I don't yeah, I'm just gonna let that one go. Like what I learned from that is I don't want to work with that person.
Mm,
I wouldn't want to be in a lab with that person. Like I might still read their research. I might still like have them as a contact because like, you know,
mhm,
what they do is integral or whatever that may be. But like I wouldn't want to work for that person. I wouldn't, I don't need to deal with that. And
mhm,
so you learn from something from those interactions as well, right?
mm.
So if somebody's not nice, don't take it personally. There's a good chance that they just are that way, and then you
Yeah.
learn that that's fine. Our energies don't mix, don't have to.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, no, what you just said really hit home. I like recently went to like my first climate conference or whatever, and I
Wow.
totally had all of these feelings. And that advice is really so important to keep in mind. Um, yeah, and like I have anxiety and stuff, so just telling that to myself all the time is like, that's really important. Thank you for sharing
Oh,
that.
absolutely. I like, and I still do it. Don't get me wrong. Like we all still do it. I was at Impact 5, which is the International Marine Protected Area Congress in
Mhm.
early February, and Ali Wilhelm, who I love her. Okay, let's just start right there. Like, she is so aspirational. She's from Hawaii, which like that's just home, right? Like, and
Yeah, yeah.
automatically you're like, oh my god, that's
Yeah.
somebody from my home. I feel so represented, and like works in the White House. Just is this badass of a woman, right?
Mhm.
I was front and center at her talk, at her
Oh my
keynote
gosh.
talk, just right, like taking notes, like ready to go,
Yeah.
just so eager. And then I talked to her afterwards. My heart was out of my chest, just pounding out of my chest, right? Like I was like, I can't believe I'm speaking to this woman. She hugged me. I was like, I'm dead. Um, but then I saw her again at our ocean in Panama. One, she remembered my name. I thought I
Oh
was
my
gonna
gosh.
actually cry. And then two, we had like just a very nice conversation, and she
Mm,
was very interested in what I was doing, and she was very interested, and she like said kind things about me, and we're just like, I love what you're doing. I'm excited to see you in these spaces more and see what you're progressing. And I was like, okay, I'm done. And you have these moments of realization that you're like, she's literally just a person too, that's
mm,
also wanting to fight for the ocean, that's also looking to do marine conservation, that sees the work that I am doing. And I was appreciative of that. As much as I'm appreciative of things that she's doing, she's also appreciative. And like one of the things that she had said in her talk was like this is like we can't all be one person doing this by ourselves. Like
yeah.
you
Yeah.
have to let others do things. You have to like literally hold hands and do this together. Like everybody has their piece to play. Everybody is doing something. If you are moving this forward, you are like we're part of this together. We just have to, for one, put differences aside and start working together and stop
Hmm.
bickering at each other because that's
Yeah.
just not helpful, which was something that hit home for me because I
Mm.
definitely I've had moments of being frustrated, and I was like,
Mm,
maybe I really need to like learn to maybe not bicker so much. But that was her whole thing, was like
mm,
we need to appreciate one another for what we're doing, because that's the only way we're actually going to be able to do this. And so when we were having that conversation, I was like, no, she genuinely means that. And it like changed my whole, like I calmed down. I was able to be like, oh, this is now somebody that I can like look up to and have a conversation with.
mm.
So it still happens to me, don't worry, it happens to everybody. But you'll realize as you have these conversations, as you have more of them, that people are just people.
People are just people. Yeah.
People are
Oh,
just
that,
people.
yeah, we definitely need to keep that in mind. And I also like really like that you emphasize how we need to do that because it's so essential that we work together in working on this because like one person can't do it all. That's
Yeah.
so important. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
yeah. So I mean, I guess to close off, where can anyone who's really interested in the like really incredible work that you're doing find you best? And I guess like what are some last thoughts that you might have?
So my online persona is Mckenzie, so Mckensia,
I
like the
see what you did
ocean.
there.
Yeah. So you'll be able to find me predominantly on Instagram and TikTok. I also have a website, mckenzie.com. And feel free to reach out. Feel free if you have questions. I try my best to answer as many people as possible. If I miss you, say something again, because the way that the Instagram inbox works, your messages do get pushed
Hmm.
down and disappear eventually. But say something again. I'll try and come back to it. But yeah, I you can find me anywhere on the digital spaces. I'm always creating educational content and trying to make climate action accessible to people. Well, that was a rough word.
Words are hard.
Words are tough, but in my final remarks is just like, thank you all for being here. Thank you for listening. If you're listening to this, if you're part of it all, then you're already doing things, and I'm so incredibly appreciative of every single one of you. And I hope that you found something useful within this, and that you're able to continue to contribute, because we really do need everyone's effort, no matter what you can give. If it's just an hour out of your month, or if it's more than that, like we need it all. We appreciate it all, and I appreciate you for being here. So,
And thank you so much, Mckenzie, for being here. It's been
course.
truly a pleasure to speak with you.
I'm glad.